When the ego dissolves, the self awakens to a reality beyond the veils of illusion. Al-Ghazali teaches that the ego, the nafs, is like a shadow clinging to the heart, whispering desires, fears, and false importance. It shapes identity through comparison, possession, and the fleeting approval of others, blinding the seeker to the eternal presence within. But when one surrenders these illusions, the layers of the ego begin to melt, revealing the light that was never truly hidden, though it was obscured by self-centered preoccupations. Imagine a mirror covered in dust. The reflection of the divine is always there, yet invisible until the dust is wiped away. The removal of the ego is that cleansing of the heart, where one stops insisting, "I am this," or "I possess that," and instead rests in the pure awareness of existence. The seeker feels a profound humility, yet not of weakness, but of liberation, for the heart no longer contorts to maintain an identity bound by fear or pride. Here begins the first step toward knowing the true self, which is not constructed, not borrowed, not claimed, but revealed. The ego deceives us into believing we are separate, yet Al-Ghazali reminds us that this separateness is an illusion. When the ego disappears, we sense the unity of all things, the pulse of creation, the whisper of the divine, the gentle hum of existence that never needed our claim to validate it. One realizes then that the self is not lost, but expanded. It is no longer a fortress of the I and mine, but a river flowing with the essence of God's mercy, wisdom, and presence. The heart learns to watch, to witness, and to rest in the stillness where ego once roared, and in that stillness the seeker touches eternity. When the ego vanishes, one discovers a profound freedom from the tyranny of desire and fear. Al-Ghazali teaches that the ego is a restless traveler, always chasing shadows of pleasure, prestige, and validation, never satisfied, never at peace. In its absence, the heart no longer trembles before the approval of men, nor clings to worldly gain. Instead, the soul experiences a luminous clarity, perceiving the divine in every moment and every being. The world, which once seemed fragmented into mine and yours, self and other, now unfolds as a seamless tapestry of signs and mysteries. One becomes aware of the hidden presence behind every face, every sound, every breeze, a presence that calls to the heart not through demand, but through gentle recognition. In this state, Al-Ghazali explains, the seeker realizes that knowledge is not merely the accumulation of facts or mastery over circumstances, but a profound witnessing of reality as it is, unbound, unpossessed, and perfectly whole. The heart that is free from ego perceives both beauty and suffering without attachment or aversion, understanding that all things are expressions of the divine will. Love ceases to be possessive. It becomes a flowing river, generous and boundless. Compassion arises naturally, for one no longer measures the worth of others by personal gain or fear of loss. Every action becomes an offering, every thought a reflection of God's presence. Even silence speaks, revealing the depth of a soul that no longer insists on its separateness. In this state, the seeker recognizes the futility of self-importance and the false pride of intellect alone. The ego fades, and in its place arises an expansive awareness where the soul dances with existence, harmonizing with the eternal rhythm that guides all things. One sees that the heart, once a battlefield, is now a sanctuary, a sacred space where God's presence is known without effort, without striving, simply by letting go. Without the ego, the seeker begins to understand the nature of true knowledge, which is not learned from books alone, nor spoken in lofty words, but revealed within the silent chambers of the heart. Al-Ghazali teaches that the ego clouds understanding with pride and self-interest, convincing the soul that wisdom is a possession, something to be held, defended, and displayed. Yet when the ego dissolves, knowledge becomes living and breathing, a direct perception of reality rather than a borrowed concept. The heart discerns the hidden meanings behind the outward forms of creation, seeing in a blade of grass, a bird in flight, or the ripple of water the silent hand of the divine. In this state, questions of "Who am I?" or "What do I own?" lose their grip, for the soul recognizes that identity is a garment worn temporarily, a role played in the theater of the world, while the essence beneath remains untouched and eternal. Al-Ghazali likens this realization to a flame that burns away the veils of illusion, leaving only light. The ego, with its demands, insecurities, and relentless chatter, is like smoke obscuring that flame. Once it disappears, the soul is no longer distracted by petty concerns, by jealousy or ambition. It experiences an effortless presence, a knowing that arises from intimacy with the divine reality. Even in the midst of worldly life, the seeker perceives everything through the lens of unity and purpose, seeing God's mercy and wisdom woven through every event. Actions are no longer dictated by selfish desire, but by natural alignment with the truth that permeates all existence. One understands that life itself is a sacred reflection, a mirror in which the divine can be glimpsed, and in this mirror the self is no longer a separate entity, but a channel through which the eternal flows. The ego is gone, and with it comes a clarity so profound that all ordinary distinctions, the boundaries between self and other, pleasure and pain, loss and gain, begin to dissolve into the infinite, revealing the soul's true home. In the final unveiling, when the ego has completely disappeared, the seeker discovers that the self is not something to be built, defended, or attained. It is simply the presence of God manifesting within. Al-Ghazali teaches that all efforts, all struggles, all questioning are ultimately meant to strip away the layers of the I and reveal what was always there: pure, unbounded awareness. The soul no longer grasps for identity, clings to achievements, or fears oblivion, for it recognizes that these concerns belong to the ego alone. What remains is a luminous clarity, a heart attuned to the rhythm of existence, perceiving the unity behind all multiplicity, the divine in every moment. Every breath becomes a prayer, every glance a revelation, every action an offering, because the self now moves not out of desire or fear, but in perfect harmony with the eternal. Time, space, and circumstance lose their oppressive power. The soul rests in an effortless stillness where God's presence is both immanent and infinite. Al-Ghazali emphasizes that this state is not a distant goal, but an ever-present reality awaiting the seeker's surrender. The ego must release its grip, and the heart must open fully. In this surrender, the soul experiences joy that is neither dependent on circumstance nor fleeting, a serenity that surpasses understanding, and a love that embraces all things without distinction. One becomes a witness to life, seeing without judgment, acting without attachment, and knowing without striving. The journey is no longer toward the self, but into the selfless essence, where all barriers dissolve, all illusions fade, and the seeker rests in the eternal truth that you were never separate, never confined, and never alone. In the absence of ego, one is fully present, fully awake, and fully alive, immersed in the infinite light of God that has always been the true self. This is the soul's ultimate awakening, the divine home beyond the illusions of identity, where being and knowing, love and presence merge into the seamless reality of existence itself.